Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
Father, we do thank you for the minds that you've given to us. We thank you for the world that we live in and its nature. We thank you for the fact that you, as a wise creator, have created and ordained all things to work to a determined purpose. I thank you, Father, that you give us understanding and that you also give us spiritual understanding in the Lord Jesus Christ. Pray that you would direct our hearts and minds as we consider how to think about the world we find ourselves in, and to think about how other people also think about it, and to be able to relate to them in an effective witness for the Lord Jesus Christ. Father, the gospel is for all people. All people need it. You have created all people for the purpose of having fellowship with you, though they have wandered away and walk in darkness. I pray that you would help us to be light through understanding this material. Direct our class today, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. What we want to do is introduce the concept of worldview in the next couple of lectures, and then move on to look specifically at Christian theism, at secular humanism, at mystical humanism. And as we are doing that, you will also be reading in Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, the flow of thought in the West, departing from Christian theism and the various stages it went through to arrive at where we are today with regard to a society, a culture that basically ignores any God element or spiritual element. And then also a segment of society that has replaced the spiritual, has replaced God with something that is spiritual but not God. And so a number of streams will come together, and I want to introduce this concept of worldview using some of Sire's material, but also other things that just help to explain it. A couple of quotations here. You look at the dates; they're fairly old, but it is still appropriate in terms of the mentality that is around. And I used this earlier when it says, I remember a philosophy professor in college who began his lectures by saying, some people do not believe in the study of philosophy. Well, they're being deceived, for philosophy simply involves the way we look at life and how we integrate those data of living into a consistent system. The question is not whether I have a philosophy. The question is rather whether the philosophy that I have is good or bad, consistent or inconsistent. Now, as we, in the introduction to philosophy lecture, talked about how philosophy approaches in terms of being primarily a speculative way of arriving at decisions about how we know and what's real and so forth. This statement really would better be read better if we substituted worldview for philosophy, because not all people do have a consciously worked out philosophy, but all people do have a worldview, which functions in the same way that a worked out philosophy does, but that comes more naturally. We commented that everybody has a worldview because everybody has adopted certain basic assumptions, certain answers to basic questions about what is the world and who we are and where we came from and why we're here and so forth. But it is true, if you put worldview in there, this statement is exactly on target. Another statement I ran across when I was first developing this material, and it's by Robert Bellah, professor of sociology at the University of California in Berkeley, and found this in actually an Alberta Report magazine on an educational conference. But the quote is this: most journalists are simply blind to religion. Now let me just stop there. As you see how religion, how Christianity specifically and religion in general is treated in the press, is treated in the media, then you really wonder, well, where are these guys? Don't they ever look? Don't they ever think? Well, the matter is that most don't think seriously about spiritual things. Most journalists are simply blind to religion. They think it's somehow slightly embarrassing, a holdover from the Dark Ages, something only ignorant and backward people really believe in. This is not necessarily a conscious judgment on their part. It's just part of their general worldview, in which religion is seen as an aberrant philosophy. That is something that is just out of place. So it's not that they have examined it, it's not that they have consciously rejected it for concrete reasons. It's just that religion, as a serious aspect of life, just doesn't have a place in their worldview because of certain basic assumptions that they have made right from the beginning. So these really do introduce the necessity to think through this concept of worldview, because everyone has one. And it affects everything that we do, the values that we hold, and so forth. And so that's what we want to consider in terms of just generally what is a worldview. And then we will look at the basic competing worldviews, and there are really only three. There have really only ever been three, and they've always been around in some sort of a form, as we will see when we come to a consideration of Acts 17. Everyone has one. A worldview is a vision of life. It is a view of what life is. It is a certain understanding of what it is that we would call life or living in this universe. But it is also a vision for life. So it is a vision that basically has an understanding about what life is, but it is also a certain viewpoint that directs how life is going to be lived and how life is going to be pursued. And so you can say that it is a vision of life, a vision for life. It is a model. It's a model of the world. We're familiar with models. If there's something that large or intricate and somebody draws a model of it to explain how it works. I remember when I was must have been junior high school. It was for some sort of a science project. And then Watson and Crick had just not too long before then come out with this whole thing of DNA and the double helix and the spiral. And I thought, this would be neat. I'll try to make a model of a DNA spiral, the helix thing, and with the 4 different things that go together. And so I bought this plastic tubing, and I tried to bend it, and I tried to cut out these little plastic things and color them differently. It was a mess. But I was trying to build a model that would help people visualize something of what was being talked about with this whole thing of the discovery of DNA and how it all goes together. And that's what a worldview is. It's a model of the world. It is a way to conceptualize what is going on around us. And as such, it serves then as a guide. It serves as a guide for action. And so that's what models can do. If you have a model of a city, if you go to Jerusalem and you go up on the Mount of Olives, I think that's where it is, there's this big, scale model of the ancient city of Jerusalem. And, the walls, about this high when they were really that high. But you could walk around it, you can see it, you can look at it. And so it would give you a sense of what it would be to be in the real city. So you've got a model that is a guide. A worldview is like a set of intellectual glasses. Now, 3D movies are back on the scene. 3D movies are really old. I mean, they were before I was a kid. You could go to a theater and put on, little cardboard things with red and green lenses, and, you had a 3D experience. Now, it's nothing like the 3D experience we have now. But you can't see it without the glasses, right? You put the glasses on and it allows you to get the 3D experience, though I'm told they're somebody's developing a television that you don't even need those glasses. That'll be interesting, won't it? But it's like a set of intellectual glasses. It affects your judgment about what you're looking at when you're looking at the world. There's the world. That's about where I used to live, up there, way up there somewhere. There's 3 sets of glasses. And you'll see on the lens of the glasses, one of them says, know God, and man is free. The other set of glasses is Creator God, man is a special creature. And then there's another set of glasses that says all is God, and man is unlimited. So depending on which set of glasses you're wearing, it will influence how you look at, evaluate, judge the kinds of decisions you make about what's going on around you. So that's just another way to think about what a worldview is and what a worldview does. That it's a set of intellectual glasses. Or another way is an ideological roadmap. An ideological roadmap. If I told you, okay, we're going to take a field trip. Everybody meet out here. I'm going to select one of you to drive, and here's where we want to go. We want to go to the Crandall Mountain Campground. Okay? Who's going to volunteer to drive? Do you know where it is? No? Well, okay, you're driving, Leah. We're at the Asbury Road. Are we going to turn right or left? GPSs are, it's just cheating. You got to get lost at least once on a trip to have, a real trip. Say there's no GPS.
Then I'm not driving.
You're not driving. This illustration is losing its effectiveness because of GPSs, because nobody knows how to read a map. GPSs are really wonderful for those people that always had to turn the map upside down when you're going south or north. Anyway. If we turn... Huh? Okay. Yeah. You don't know which way to turn. If you turn left, you never get there, because that's east. And the Crandall Mountain Campground is west. Okay, we're headed west. How far west did we go? No. Try 30 hours. Okay? Because it happens to be in Alberta. Where's Alberta? Canada. Well, Canada's north. Why are we going west? Well, because if you go north from here, you end up in Ontario. And next to it is Saskatchewan. And then comes, Manitoba, and then Saskatchewan, and then Alberta. So it's really north of Montana. Now you'd know which direction to go, at least to start out with. You'd go west, right? You don't even know that, living in Colorado?
There's no mountains here. I don't know which direction is west.
Yeah, there it is. You have to see a mountain to know what direction it is. But the point is that when you start out without a road map and you've never been there and you don't know how to get there, what are the chances that you're going to make it? Not very good. So it's like an ideological road map. Now, people are going through life with a faulty road map if they don't have a correct worldview. How do they get anywhere? Well, because everybody has in their worldview enough right stuff that they aren't totally lost in traveling through life. But the more critical the decision is, the more important a certain element of life is, the more detailed your map needs to be. So maps are important, and the lack of an adequate map can be dangerous, deadly. And that's the way it is with a worldview, too. If you've got the wrong ideological map of the makeup of the world, you get to the end of this life and you're expecting one thing because you're reading a wrong map, and instead you find judgment, bad maps can lead to tragic consequences. So you can think of a worldview like an intellectual roadmap. An intellectual roadmap that has as an outcome, what life is all about, and where we're headed, and where we're going to end up. So everyone has one. And everyone needs one. Everyone needs a worldview. Here's a poem that's in your notes. Matthew Arnold, The Buried Life. I know how well y'all like poetry. We're going to analyze this poem. But often in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the din of strife, what kind of an emotional atmosphere is that drawing? Huh? Crazy, busy, tension-filled, stressful. So he's talking about going through life, and often there are times where, things are just a frenzy. They're crashing in. There arises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life. Now, the title of the poem is The Buried Life. Our buried life. First of all, it's not my buried life, but our buried life. Who is the our? All men, mankind. So this is a collective, mankind type of pursuit. And what is the buried life? Well, let's read on. A thirst to spend our fire and restless force in tracking out our true, original course. What is mankind's true, original course? Where did mankind start? Huh? With God. And who was the first man? Adam. And why did God create Adam and Eve? We just talked about this in the Old Testament yesterday for those of you, most of you were there. Why did He create them? Well, to be His special image bearer, to have fellowship with Him, and to rule over the earth, to have co-dominion with Him. He created mankind for a purpose. And that is the buried life. It's way back there. It's out of the consciousness of people. And yet, everybody has the sense at certain times, especially when things are really troublesome, where do we come from? Why are we here? What's the point of it all? And so there arises this unspeakable desire after the knowledge of mankind's buried life, a thirst to spend our fire and restless force in tracking out our true original course, a longing to inquire into the mystery of this heart, which beats so wild, so deep in us, to know whence our lives come and where they go. Whence means from where. Okay, it's a poetic way of saying from where. Where do our lives come from? Where do we come from and where are we going? And those are two of the most fundamental questions in life that people need answers for, and that all people have some assumed answer to. And so that's why people philosophize. Well, what is this thing called life? Why are we here? What's going on? And there are different answers to that question. And so we have an inner necessity to know, and all people have a drive to find out. And that's in that poem as well. Here's Herman Cartoon, and he's asking two of those questions. Who am I and what am I doing here? Now, what's the problem with the situation, the context in which he's asking those questions? Huh? He's at an information booth or an information kiosk. The lady obviously is there to give him directions in the mall or the department store. Can she handle those questions? No. So he's asking two really important questions, but not to somebody who can give the answers. So it's important that we find out. So from an inner necessity, but also there's a cultural challenge. If a person was, all by himself and found himself alive on a desert island, didn't know there's any other humanity, that question would still be there. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? Even more profoundly. But there's also a challenge because of our culture, because of where we live. We need a consciously held worldview because our culture is, first of all, global. And it is more so all the time with the electronic media and the instantaneous contact and information that we can have of what's going on with peoples and ideas. We are continually in touch with people of cultures and societies from around the world. And this often makes Christianity seem like just another option or another lifestyle. It's just one of the many choices. Secondly, our culture is secular. Secular, there's no longer exists a firm belief in a supreme being as the foundation upholding our society. This makes Christianity seem narrow and unreal and causes Christians to retreat into a closed religion. This kind of describes a certain kind of a society. What's missing? You've got the home, you've got the computer for education, you've got the Parthenon for government. What's missing? Church. Our society feels, a large segment of our society, that life can be pursued, government can be pursued, nations can carry on without recourse to religion or God. It's just a personal matter. And that part has been separated off. And so this is this is a secular society. And so there's a challenge there. How do we respond to that? How do we resist that? How do we react to it? And a pluralistic society. There's a plurality of competing worldviews confronting us each day. This has challenged the security of the Christian's truth claims, not of truth itself, but of our ability to sustain them and to talk about them. Somebody has called this the smorgasbord mentality, so that we look at life and worldview options sort of like going through a buffet. You got all this food. Take whatever you want. Take as much as you want. Leave what you don't want. So the idea of options, freedom, diversity, relativism, and so that really is the world we live in. It's not the small village anymore that's insulated but from all kinds of different kinds of influences, but it's really a global village. And so there are challenges that are unparalleled to other generations in terms of just the multiplicity of ideas and of views about these most important questions that are there to be selected, there to be embraced. So there's the cultural challenge. Now, what makes up a worldview? What's the stuff of a worldview? I've given you some questions. It's composed of answers to some basic questions. James Sire in the 4th edition, I probably need to change that. He's changed that a little bit. What's prime reality, the really real? What's the nature of external reality, that is, the world around us? What's a human being? What happens to a person at death? Why is it possible to know anything at all? How do we know what is right and wrong? And what's the meaning of history? Those are fundamental questions. Or Walsh and Middleton in The Transforming Vision boil it down to these. Who am I? Where am I? What's wrong? And what's the remedy? So very personal, existential type questions. But all of those other issues are embedded in there somehow. Or Colson and Piercy in How Now Shall We Live in the workbook, the questions, where did we come from and who are we? What's gone wrong with the world? And what can we do to fix it? So these are the most basic questions. These are at the foundation of what gives people an understanding of who they are, what they're doing, and how to get along in life. So a worldview is composed of answers to some of these basic questions. Now, on page 3 of your notes, I think it's still 3 in your notes, How do we define a worldview? And again, I've given you a number of definitions. Let me read through these. The definition of James Sire in the third edition is: a worldview is a set of presuppositions or an assumption which may be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently about the basic makeup of the world. I will come back to his next definition, but Probe Ministries gives this definition: a system of basic beliefs about the world and ourselves which influences the way we live. Walsh and Middleton in the Transforming Vision: a people's worldview is their way of thinking about life and the world, coupled with the values that they set for themselves in the context of that way of thinking. You can see that these statements are basically saying the same thing from a little different angle. Piercy, in their book Total Truth, says, to say that Christianity is the truth about total reality means that it is a full-orbed worldview. The term means literally a view of the world, a biblically informed perspective on all reality. A worldview is like a mental map that tells us how to navigate the world effectively. It is the imprint of God's objective truth on our inner life. So that's, those are some definitions. The definition we're going to work from is Sire's expanded definition. And he says a worldview is a commitment, a fundamental orientation of the heart that can be expressed as a story or in a set of presuppositions. That is, assumptions which may be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently, about the basic constitution of reality, and that provides the foundation on which we live and move and have our being. Now, let's break these down into their parts and talk about each one. He says it's a commitment. He's added this as he has developed his understanding of this. It's a commitment. He says it's a matter of the soul. It's a spiritual orientation more than a matter of mind alone. People hold their view of the world, their intellectual roadmap, very dearly. They hold it, as that which is to fight for, to die for, as that which really, since it defines who they are, is something that is not going to be just casually dismissed or allow it to be confronted casually. It is situated in the self, the central operating chamber of every human being. So it's a commitment. It's a commitment to this most basic understanding about where we are, where we came from. Most people do not say, oh, well, let's see, some days I think we just came from nothing, and other days I think God created us, and it really doesn't matter, and I waffle back and forth. People hold to one or the other of those, and they hold it strongly for good or bad reasons, but still, it's something that is not just a neutral idea. Secondly, he says, it can be expressed as either a story or a set of presuppositions. He says, when I reflect on where I and the whole human race have come from, or where my life or humanity itself is headed, my worldview is being expressed as a story. And he says there's the story of secular science, the story of Christianity, the story of Eastern thought. Now, he's not using story here in the terms of fairy tale. He's not saying Christianity is just another make-believe version of where we came from. What he's saying is that people can spin it like a story. Well, way back before there was anything, there was a big explosion. And you begin to unfold the view that the world just came into being on its own. And so you're kind of spinning the scenario of how that happened. Or if you read the biblical story of creation and the flood, you're really, it's giving it to us in a narrative form. And that's what he's meaning by story. It can be told and it can be conceptualized that way. And as you would dig around in the archaeological records of nations and peoples that we've discovered on the earth, you would find that all peoples have some sort of a story about where everything came from. They would often be called myths, but still it's what guides them in terms of where it all started. And so everybody at least has some sort of a conception of that narrative line, that storyline that would answer these big questions. Some people often also would hold it as a set of presuppositions. And a presupposition is a basic belief. It comes from the Latin word which means the act of placing under. It's a taking for granted something is true or existent as the basis for subsequent decisions and judgments. You might say, well, assuming this, then this follows. Well, that assumption is a presupposition. You're presupposing something in order to argue it. You know, or you're in a discussion, okay, well, given that, this is what would happen. That's the presupposition. So when we talk about a worldview as a set of presuppositions, we're talking about some things that are the most basic, assumed answers to questions. And that's what he says. It's what must be assumed to be true if an argument or judgment is to be accepted. So it is an assumed answer to these basic questions. So a presupposition is a necessary starting point. It's an assumption that is foundational to other beliefs and actions. It is a basic belief, all right? Now, since it's the presupposition, it's here at the bottom. And a person's presupposition in a given area is a basis then for values. What we deem important, is based upon certain assumptions we make about life, about living, about our universe, about our part in it. Those values, in turn, give rise to decisions. So what I value will move me in terms of what I'm going to pursue, for instance. What kinds of things I'm going to focus on. So decisions come out of values. And of course, decisions then need to be acted upon. So the action comes next. And then actions have results or consequences. So you can see the logical progression from a basic assumption, rising to then what I'm going to value, to the decisions that I make, to the actions that come from those decisions, and the result of those actions. So a presupposition, when we're talking about worldview categories, are those most foundational beliefs. So for instance, to the question, what is prime reality, the really real? You really only have two choices. Well, God, He's the ultimate reality, or matter, the material universe. So, the fundamental thing about, the makeup of the world. What is the nature of the physical creation? Well, it's an accidental happening as a result of an explosion and evolutionary process, or it resulted from God's creative work. Those are the most basic assumptions that can be made about this universe we live in. And once you make one of those assumptions, you see how different line follows in terms of value, decisions, and so forth. We'll illustrate this when we get to the end of this section. So, a set of presuppositions. A set is something that is taken together. It's taken as a group of things. Okay? When I ask myself what I'm really assuming about God, humans, and the universe, the result is a set of presuppositions that I can express in propositional form. And that's what Sire will be doing in the book. You've already read chapter 1, and he has laid out what these basic questions are. When expressed that way, they answer a series of basic questions about the nature of fundamental reality. A set is a number of things naturally connected. A worldview is made up of a number of naturally connected presuppositions. For instance, we cannot talk about a person's identity without considering ultimate origins. So you really can't talk about who you are unless you talk about where you came from. Now, that's true in the immediate sense and the ultimate sense. So if I want to begin to discover who you are, I'm going to start asking you questions. Not just your name. I can see the color of your hair, at least what it is today. Maybe it was some other color before. And if you tell me it was purple at one point, then I'm starting to learn more about you maybe. If I find out, what your ethnic background was, what your nationality is, what part of the country you came from, I'm learning about you because I'm finding something about your origins. We are all affected, influenced by all of those things that have to do with where we came from, our origins. Well, as that is true individually, as people in the human race, so it is true in terms of all of humanity. It really doesn't make a difference whether we came out of, some green oozy pool, of accidental coming together and something crawling out and becoming us, or if God created us as human beings, which is still the life that we have coming from our parents. So those go together. They're naturally connected, aren't they? And you can't talk about origins without talking about purpose. If everything came into being accidentally, can you say there was a purpose to it? No. A purpose has to be given by a purposer. All right? But God tells us, and the Bible tells us, why mankind was created. And so origin dictates purpose or leads to consideration of purpose. Those things naturally go together. When you talk about purpose, what is the purpose of mankind? You're going to say, well, let's see what mankind's been doing for all the time here. What kind of pursuits does the human beings give themselves to? What's been the history of the human race on earth? And so, you can't think about purpose without thinking about, well, does this show itself in the progress and we call it the progress of the human race, don't we? Why? Because we have a sense that it's going somewhere. It's been somewhere and it's going somewhere. And so they go together, don't they? And you can't talk about history without talking about things like death and evil. Because man's history is an awful history of war and conflict. And then there's that thing of death that nobody has escaped, with the exception of one. Well, Jesus didn't even escape it. He just overcame it. All right? So, you see how it all hangs together? And so that's the idea of these questions naturally go together. They just aren't arbitrary. But the answers to those questions give us a basic foundational understanding in these areas that then is able to guide and direct us. So it's a set of presuppositions. Now, D on page 5, which may be true, partially true, or entirely false. Okay? And the whole point of this course is that there isn't one worldview held among humanity. There's more than one. All right? And they have contradictory answers to some of these questions. So they can't both be true. Now, the postmodernists would say, don't be so fast here. Sure, they can both be true. It can be true for you. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, and so we both have truth. Well, that's one definition of truth, but it really isn't truth. Whatever one may assume about reality, what actually is true. Now, philosophers will try to dismiss that sometimes, but truth is what actually coheres with reality, what you actually find, all right? So when we start talking about a worldview, we're going to say, does this worldview fit with what we actually find and see? Or am I somehow misconstruing what we see? Or playing games with it? So people's worldview may be true, they may be partially true, they may have an admixture of stuff, or it might be entirely false. So people aren't consistent. People aren't consistent. Okay, the next point, E, is these may be held consciously or subconsciously. Okay? The worldviews and opinions we hold are either adopted or considered. Okay? Now, let me carefully state this. Young children basically are sponges, right? I mean, they do have a temperament that's built into them. They're wired in certain ways. But they also just absorb whatever is in their environment. And so children naturally absorb the speech patterns of their parents, of those who they're most influenced by. And so people, babies who are born and raised in France, they actually form, their vocal apparatus actually forms differently than people who are raised in other linguistic backgrounds. And that's why people that come from backgrounds sometimes cannot pronounce letters and sounds in the new language because their vocal apparatus actually isn't capable of it. But anyway, it's not just that. We absorb everything. We absorb our beliefs. So children naturally grow up believing what their parents believed, in God or not in God. All right? It's just natural. So in that sense, we all start out basically as adopters. We adopt these answers to these basic questions, these presuppositions. At some point, we need to consider them and make them our own. Now, I'm not saying throw over everything that we've been taught, but we need to say, okay, now I've believed this because Mom and Dad have believed it. They believe in God. Why do I believe in God? Well, there's all these reasons. Okay, yeah, I believe in God. Not just because Mom and Dad did, but because it is also something that I consciously can embrace. And so it's not a process of starting over. It's not a process of jettisoning everything, extreme doubt, and you see this in a philosophical movement. But it is realizing that as we emerge into adulthood, that's a big part of it. All right? You're responsible for what you believe. Mom and Dad right about things. They might have been wrong about some things. You might have, legitimate differences in this area, that area. But the point is, we have both adopted and considered opinions. Now, just because it's adopted doesn't make it wrong, right? Just because it's considered doesn't make it right. You see, it's not right just because I've decided intellectually it's right. That doesn't mean it coheres with reality. All right? And it's not wrong just because somebody else held it first and taught it to me. That's not the point. The point is that we start out as adopters, but somewhere along the line, we move to where these are ours. Now, we might continue in wrong ideas about things. We might continue in right ideas about things. But we will start thinking about them and make them our own. So we hold these things consciously or subconsciously. All right? Most people never, really work out a philosophy. We made that point. Everybody has a worldview, but a good number of people, if not most people, never really think about the worldview. But if you ask them the questions, they will have answers. Okay? They've just been, going along with those answers sort of unconsciously and operating on those bases, but they've never really put it together conceptually. So So just be aware of that. One of the things that college is you making life more fully your own. That doesn't mean different from your parents. It doesn't mean in rebellion to your parents or your church or your elders or your faith or anything else. But that's emergence into adulthood, is that you're responsible for what you think, for what you believe. And, that's an awesome responsibility. But that's how God has made us. He's made us as thinking creatures. He hasn't made us just as puppets. He wants us to respond to Him. He wants us to exercise faith in Him. He wants us to walk in fellowship with Him. But He wants us to do it voluntarily and willingly and thinkingly and wholeheartedly. So, that's one of the things this course will help you with too, is just realize all the truth that you already have embraced. And to be able to hold it with some greater certainty and a greater ability to discuss it with those who don't hold to that. So we will adopt and hold those presuppositions that come to us through natural associations and relationships until and unless we make them our own or change them through conscious evaluation. So, you're aware of that in a sense, but you may have been aware of it subconsciously rather than consciously. Okay? So don't be afraid to ask yourself, okay, well, this is what I've always believed. Why do I believe this? All right? That's not an act of rebellion. All right? In most cases, for most of you, it will probably be just an act of confirmation and clarification and an exercise of confidence, having confidence in what you believe in terms of Christianity. And the next one is held consistently or inconsistently. Our presuppositions may fit together as a well-integrated whole, or they may be in conflict at one or more points. The more consistent our presuppositions are with reality, and the more consistently that we hold them, the better chance we have of living life to its absolute fullest. So this is where, as human beings, we both reach the heights and the depths. The heights in terms of what we can do, what we can process with our minds, and how we can integrate life, and how we can bring things together into a workable, organized whole. But also the silliness that we can fall into, the inconsistencies that we can let into and allow in our own lives, even in our own beliefs, even on our own belief system, in our behavior within our belief system. And we'll explore this a little more in the next class, but I don't want to cut it short. So that's, we'll come back to that. G, about the basic makeup of our world. Where did everything come from? How does it work? What are its rules? Where is it going? How do I fit in? So in some senses, life is like a puzzle. If you look at this, a puzzle that of life, you've got politics and education and healthcare and arts, environmental concerns and legal institutions and family. You got all these things that touch my life that I'm a part of, and my worldview is that piece in the middle that is there to integrate all of those kinds of things. And that worldview piece, that worldview is the collection of answers to these basic questions. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's the basic makeup of the world? Now, if that piece is not right, then you end up with something like that. How many of you like to make puzzles? How many of you know people that you do not like to make puzzles with? Because one of the things they do is they say, oh, this piece fits there. See? I told you it fit there. All right? A worldview either fits all of reality, all of life, or it doesn't. And so the degree to which one's worldview is consistent with reality is the degree to which life can be totally integrated and most fully experienced and enjoyed.